It all started in Miami, where a young man was violently kidnapped at gunpoint. The abductors demanded an enormous ransom and made it clear, if the demands weren't met, they'd kill him. As soon as the case reached law enforcement, both local police and the FBI were drawn in, uncovering deeply disturbing clues. Every lead, no matter how small, became crucial in the desperate race to bring the young man home alive. Kidnappings can rip families apart in the blink of an eye. 1 minute, life is normal. The next, it's consumed by fear and agony. Back in 1984, what began as a normal business day took a dark turn, spiraling into a terrifying hostage situation. I'm Carl St. I used to head the New York FBI field office. A voice narrates. At first glance, the case looked like a straightforward ransom situation, but it turned out to be way more complex. The date was Tuesday, August 7, 1984. Around 6 p.m. in Miami, Florida, real estate developer Russ Portella was closing up shop for the day. Russ had emigrated from Cuba 2 years earlier and had built a thriving construction business. His 22-year-old son, Mario, recently married, was working as a sales rep alongside his uncle. Right after closing, a couple stopped by the office. Mario and his uncle stepped outside to speak with them. The pair seemed interested in housing prices, though the man acted nervously. Mario's uncle politely explained the office was closed and asked him to return the next morning. At their insistence, he stepped inside to grab a few brochures. What he didn't see was a danger unfolding outside. Suddenly, a man pulled up in a car and pointed a gun at Mario, forcing him into the vehicle. His uncle caught a glimpse of the car's license plate, but only managed to memorize the last 3 digits. He immediately reported the incident to Russ, explaining that Mario had been shoved into a bluish-gray car that sped off north along 122nd Avenue. Without waiting for law enforcement, Russ took matters into his own hands. Armed with a legally registered firearm he'd carried for years, he scoured the roads for the car. He did spot a vehicle that matched the description, but it turned out to be the wrong one. Realizing he couldn't solve this alone, he returned to the office to await the authorities. Detective Elviro Romero of the Metro-Dade police responded to the emergency call. In 1984, kidnappings weren't rare in Miami. Romero estimated about 1 case per month, usually connected to drug trafficking. However, it didn't take long for investigators to realize this case was different. After speaking with Mr. Portella, the team concluded that the family was involved in drugs. Russ was a respected businessman, and the motive appeared to be purely financial. That meant anyone aware of the family's wealth could be a suspect. Crime scene investigators scoured the office door for fingerprints, assuming the abductors might have touched it. Unfortunately, no usable prints were recovered. Roughly an hour after the kidnapping, the phone rang. The caller spoke in Spanish, asking about Mario. Mr. Portella didn't recognize the voice. The man claimed to be part of a terrorist group and demanded $3 million for Mario's release. Although the call wasn't recorded, a Spanish-speaking investigator was listening in and identified the accent as Colombian. The caller threatened to kill Mario if police or the FBI got involved and said they were watching the family's home. Terrified, Russ begged to speak with his son, but the caller refused, saying someone would call back in the coming days. Though the call couldn't be traced, offered insight into the kidnappers. They were methodical, cautious, and clearly serious. Their threats weren't empty. Because of the ransom demand, the Metro-Dade police brought in the FBI immediately. Special Agent John Gill took over the case. Since Russ Portella's business operated across multiple states, the crime qualified under the Hobbs Act, a federal law allowing FBI jurisdiction in multi-state extortion cases. The FBI quickly wired all of the Portella phones, both at home and at the office, with call tracing and recording equipment. The very next day, they arranged to meet with Russ, but not at his home or workplace. Instead, they chose an abandoned parking garage. Agents secured every entrance, ensuring it was safe. This allowed Agent Gill to speak with Russ in private. Gill asked whether anyone had threatened him recently or might have a grudge. Russ recalled an incident from 8 months earlier when FBI agent Gill asked Russ Portella if anyone had ever threatened him. He recalled a strange incident that happened about 8 months earlier. A woman and a man had burst into his office. Clearly upset, the woman, who introduced herself as Rose Deparius, had recently purchased a property from him. She was angry because she found out her neighbor had lower mortgage payments than she did. Russ explained the situation calmly. He had no control over the loan terms. The bank had offered better rates to her neighbor based on their financial profile. Her payments weren't going to Russ. The bank financed the deal and collected the payments. But Rose and her companion didn't accept that explanation. The man with her became aggressive, even threatening Russ, demanding he return the money. "We'll get it back. You'll see," he warned. As they were leaving, Rose added ominously, "I'll find a way to get my money back." Russ had reported the incident to the police. Authorities spoke with Rose and explained how real estate financing works. She apologized, and Russ assumed the situation had blown over. Investigators quickly located Rose Deparius. She turned out to be living in another state at the time of the kidnapping. Her alibi checked out, so she was no longer considered a suspect. Still, the whole encounter lingered in their minds. Meanwhile, time was ticking. With each passing day, the odds of finding Mario alive grew smaller. The team hoped desperately that the kidnappers would reach out again. The FBI had fully wired the phones in Russ Portella's home and office with surveillance gear and tracking technology. Agents like Special Agent Arancha took turns monitoring the calls from inside the house. But entering the home without alerting the kidnappers, who claimed they were watching, was tricky. To avoid suspicion, agents would crouch in the backseat of vehicles as they were driven into garage, then sneak into the house unseen. They were determined to record every interaction with the kidnappers, especially calls related to ransom demands. Agents and detectives worked in shifts, maintaining round-the-clock surveillance, 24 hours a day. They also coached Russ carefully. His role was vital. First, they had to confirm whether Mario was even still alive. So they instructed Russ to ask very specific, personal questions, things only Mario could answer. For instance, childhood nicknames or the name of his wife's childhood pet. To help, the FBI compiled a full profile on Mario, his favorite foods, his hobbies, his personality. He was the kind of young man everyone admired, smart, kind, with good grades, and a bright future ahead alongside his new wife. That made this case especially heartbreaking. People could see themselves in Mario and his family. They were living the American dream, until it suddenly turned into a nightmare. Then, just as promised, the kidnappers called back a few days after the abduction. It was Friday, August 10th, 1984. The call came through, and this time, it was a recorded message. Mario's voice pleaded with his father to pay the ransom. He said the kidnappers were serious and would kill him if law enforcement got involved. Russ, staying composed, told the caller he might be able to get the money from the bank. He also asked the questions the FBI had prepared. What was Mario's childhood nickname? What was the name of his wife's old dog? The caller said he'd call back with the answers. Thankfully, Russ managed to keep him on the line long enough for the FBI to trace the call. It led them to a payphone in Miami, but the caller was already gone by the time police arrived. In the tense days that followed, Russ received more calls. One, oddly, came from a different man speaking Spanish. He started talking about business, something unrelated to the kidnapping. Frustrated, Russ said he didn't have time for that. He was dealing with a serious crisis. But the man was persistent. He kept hinting that he could help with Russ's problem. That raised red flags for the FBI. Maybe this wasn't just a coincidence. Russ kept the man talking while investigators traced the call. It took some time, but the call originated from the same general area as the kidnapper's earlier call. Officers were dispatched immediately. They arrived just in time to see the man on the phone. They tailed him discreetly as he left with a bag of food from a fast food restaurant, one that, according to Mario's profile, was his favorite. The man walked into an apartment complex and did something strange. He dropped the food off silently at a door. No knocking, no talking, just left it and walked away. That's when suspicion really kicked in. Could this be where Mario was being held? Because of Mario's love for burgers from that specific fast food chain, agents grew suspicious. The delivery might not be random. Could he be inside that apartment? A SWAT team was immediately called in. Time was slipping away fast, and they needed to act quickly. They surrounded the building, believing they were finally on the verge of rescuing Mario. FBI agents and local officers moved into position. With everything in place, they swept the apartment room by room. But Mario wasn't there. It was a dead end. FBI Special Agent John Gill led the search and confirmed that none of the apartment's residents had any ties to the kidnapping. The man who had made the suspicious food drop was questioned. Turns out he had applied for a job at Mr. Portella's company and had no idea about the kidnapping. Another lead vanished into thin air. Once again, they had no choice but to wait. The next move belonged to the kidnappers. Then, the original caller reached out again. This time, he correctly answered the questions about Mario's childhood nickname and the name of his wife's former dog. That gave investigators a glimmer of hope. Mario was probably still alive. The caller demanded the full $3 million again. But Russ explained that he'd spoken with the bank and could only gather about a third of that amount. The caller eventually agreed to accept $1 million instead. They made arrangements. The man said he'd call back in a few hours to provide the drop-off location. Then, just like before, he hung up before agents could track him. Russ quickly met with plainclothes officers at the bank. The full amount, $1 million in cash, was withdrawn. FBI agents recorded every serial number to make the ransom money traceable. They also concealed a radio transmitter inside the briefcase, hoping it would lead them straight to Mario's location. As promised, the kidnappers called again. They gave exact instructions for the drop. Russ was to drive to a specific location, leave the cash in the car with the doors unlocked, and wait for another call at a nearby payphone. He was told to come alone. Russ followed the instructions to the letter, though the drive was less than 30 minutes. The anxiety made it feel like forever. The meeting spot was in a rough neighborhood, and undercover agents were already scattered throughout the area, keeping watch from every possible angle. Some even had a vantage point from an apartment across the street. Russ, carrying $1 million in cash, remained remarkably calm. Everyone involved, especially FBI Special Agent Gil Arancha, was impressed by his composure and courage. Most people in his shoes would have cracked under the pressure. Agents surveilled the restaurant Russ was told to wait near. But something was off. The restaurant was closed, and the payphone wasn't where the kidnappers had said it would be. A sinking feeling crept in. Still, Russ waited, hoping the call would come, but it never did. With no other choice, he eventually had to return home, money in hand, but without his son. Days passed in silence. No more phone calls. No ransom instructions. The FBI grew increasingly concerned. Those calls had been the only way to connect with the abductors, and now even that lifeline was gone. Still, not all hope was lost. FBI Special Agent John Hanlon decided to revisit one key detail: the getaway vehicle. Witnesses had described it as a four-door, bluish-gray Chevrolet with dealer plates. The plates were transfer tags, often used by car dealerships and not listed in standard vehicle databases. That made them nearly impossible to trace. However, Hanlon had a hunch. He knew that some shady dealerships illegally rent out used cars that were technically for sale. These cars often had those exact kinds of temporary tags. So, he began making calls. Every single auto dealership in the region. It was tedious, exhausting work. But eventually, it paid off. He spoke with a salesperson at one specific lot and asked, "Do you rent out used cars with dealer plates?" "Yes," she replied. "Any old Chevrolets?" "Yes." "Any bluish-gray ones?" "Yes. In fact, one just came back." Hanlon's heart raced. "When was it rented out?" She replied, "August 7th. That was the exact day Mario was kidnapped." When the car dealership confirmed that the bluish-gray Chevrolet had been rented on August 7th, the same day Mario was abducted, FBI agents rushed to secure the vehicle. It had been returned the day after the kidnapping, giving investigators a narrow window to search for clues. Crime scene technicians from the Metro-Dade police thoroughly examined the car. At first glance, it didn't offer much. There were no usable fingerprints, hairs, or fibers. But then, they checked on the back seat and found something. A set of keys, attached to a small keychain. The FBI knew that Mario drove a Volvo. They immediately brought the keys to the Portella family. And sure enough, they fit both his car and his house. That was it. Confirmation that this car was involved in the abduction. Digging into the dealership's rental records, agents found that the car had been rented by a woman named Gelida Deparius. The saleswoman remembered her clearly. Gelida had come in with a man she introduced as her brother. Special Agent Hanlon requested driver's license photos for Gelida and her siblings. A few days later, he returned to the dealership with a stack of images. The saleswoman didn't hesitate. "That's her," she said, pointing to Gelida. "Are you sure?" Hanlon asked. "Absolutely," she replied. Then he showed her another photo of the man who had accompanied her. "That's Julio, her brother," she confirmed. They came in together. August 7th, I'm sure of it. The name Deparius rang a bell for the agents. Rose Deparius, the woman who had once threatened Russ, had the same last name. Turns out, Rose was Gelida and Julio's sister. While Rose was still considered cleared, the new evidence made her siblings primary suspects. Surveillance operations were quickly launched. Agents began tailing Gelida and the man who was often seen with her, likely her boyfriend. They were cautious, knowing that any sudden move could put Mario's life in danger if he was still alive. FBI and local police tracked the suspect on the ground and even from the air, but the suspect seemed to sense something was off. They changed directions frequently, made unpredictable turns, and zigzagged across parking lots in an erratic attempt to throw off anyone who might be following them. It was working. The limited number of surveillance vehicles made it difficult to keep up without being noticed. When the same unmarked car passed them multiple times, they likely caught on. Eventually, the FBI's helicopter had to abandon the chase due to low fuel. Ground units tried to maintain a visual, but in confusion, the suspects vanished. Then came a devastating blow. 13 days after Mario's abduction, two teenagers stumbled upon something horrifying in a field roughly 40 kilometers north of Miami, near the town of Davie, Florida. They had found a body. Detective Taylor was called to the scene. The victim was male, but they couldn't immediately determine his age or identity. His entire head was tightly wrapped in layers of duct tape. His wrists and ankles were bound the same way, securely tied behind his back. With no ID and barely any visible features, investigators had little to work with. The body, along with the duct tape and the bag it was found in, was sent to the lab for further analysis. Dr. James Onley, the medical examiner for Broward County, performed the autopsy. He carefully began unwrapping the tape, knowing that every piece had the potential to hold DNA or trace evidence. Beneath the layers, the victim was identified as a brown-haired man, roughly 5 feet 9 inches tall, likely between the ages of 20 and 40. He had suffered abuse, but the official cause of death was asphyxiation. He had suffocated, likely within the last 24 to 36 hours. In an effort to match him with missing persons, the team took photographs. But the tape had distorted his features, and Florida's summer heat had already begun the process of decomposition. They lifted fingerprints from the body and sent them out to police departments across the state, hoping for a match. On August 25th, a local Miami newspaper published a report about the body, discovered in Davie. The moment FBI Special Agent John Gill read the article, something clicked. The vague description of the victim matched Mario Portella's profile. Without hesitation, he contacted the Davie Police Department. Soon after, files on Mario's disappearance were transferred to Davie. Gill met with Detective Taylor, and together they visited the Broward County Medical Examiner's office. Their dental records were compared against the recovered remains. The match was undeniable. The victim was Mario. The confirmation hit everyone hard. What was once a kidnapping case had now officially turned into a murder investigation. The FBI began closing in on their list of suspects. At the top, Julio Deparius, the same man who had threatened Jesus Portella the previous year. Then there was his sister Gelida, who had rented the car used in the abduction. And finally, Gelida's boyfriend, a man they hadn't yet identified by name. All three had vanished. Agents then discovered a fourth potential suspect, Hector Deparius, brother to Julio and Gelida. Hector had a criminal history and was known to be close to his siblings. Now that Mario was confirmed dead, the FBI could move more openly with their investigation. They started by questioning Rose Deparius, sister to the three siblings. Rose had previously threatened the Portella family during a dispute over mortgage payments, but she insisted she had nothing to do with the kidnapping or murder and was willing to help. She revealed the name of Gelita's boyfriend, Jess Ramirez. If Jess, Gelita, and Julio weren't in Miami anymore, she added, they had probably fled to Los Angeles, where they had friends. This tip was immediately passed to the FBI's Los Angeles field office. Special Agent Gregory P. took over. He knew time was critical. These weren't just kidnappers. They were now murder suspects. Dangerous people. The kind you don't want roaming free in your city. Agent Pack began narrowing down the search. Knowing the suspects were of Colombian descent, he focused on LA's Rampart District, home to a large Colombian population. He walked door to door, visiting laundromats, restaurants, hotels, motels, anywhere the suspects might be hiding. After weeks of ground-level searching, he finally got a break. A building manager recognized the people in the photos. She identified Hector, Gelita, and Julio as recent tenants, although she said they were rarely in the apartment. Pack left his business card and asked her to call if she saw them again. He also made sure to check in with her daily. Finally, one evening around 9 p.m., the call came. "They're here," she said. Agents swarmed the building, surrounding it, so there'd be no way out, not through windows, not through back doors. When they knocked, a man opened the door, holding a gun. He pointed the weapon at the agents, but they acted fast, tackling and disarming him before he could fire. That man was Jess Ramirez, Gelita's boyfriend. He was immediately arrested for assaulting a federal officer. Another man was inside, Hector Deparius. He was on parole at the time for drug possession and burglary and was now in violation of his release terms. He, too, was taken into custody. That made 2 down. But 2 suspects were still missing, Julio and Gelita. Agents stayed behind at the apartment, hoping the others would return. A few hours later, Gelita walked through the door. She was also arrested and brought to the Los Angeles FBI office for questioning. But Julio, the last suspect, was nowhere to be found. Back in Miami, Special Agent Gill got word of the arrests. He flew to L.A. that same day and joined the investigation team. While Gelita and Jess refused to talk, there was still hope Hector might cooperate. At first, Hector was evasive, dodging questions and lying. But Gill and Detective Taylor decided to take a softer approach. They built a rapport with him, gained his trust, and over time, Hector started to open up. On the second day of questioning, he finally began to crack. He wasn't part of the original kidnapping, but he knew what happened after. His siblings had reached out to him days after the abduction. They needed help, and Hector, unemployed and desperate for money, agreed to watch Mario for them. Little by little, he started revealing more. As Hector Deparius finally opened up, he revealed what truly happened in the days following Mario's kidnapping. He wasn't part of the abduction itself. But a few days after Mario was taken, his siblings brought the victim to an apartment. They quickly realized something. They were in way over their heads. Watching a hostage was harder than they thought. They needed help. Hector, unemployed and desperate, was offered money to keep an eye on Mario. He agreed. According to Hector, the entire plan was born out of pride and revenge. Julio felt humiliated. He had failed to force Mr. Portella into refunding his sister for her home purchase. And now, the situation was spiraling out of control. After several days of tension, Julio and Jess Ramirez began to panic. The pressure, the police, the looming risk, it was too much. They decided to abandon the ransom demand entirely. But instead of letting Mario go, they chose the worst possible path. They decided to kill him. On August 17, 1984, 10 days after the abduction, Jess Ramirez took action. He tightly wrapped Mario's head in layers of duct tape. Mario begged for his life, gasping for air, praying someone would save him. But Jess struck him with a metal rod, ending his life in cold blood. Hector said He didn't know where Julio had gone, but he did know exactly where Mario had been held and killed. Not only did he give agents the apartment address, he even drew a layout of the place. A team of FBI agents, detectives, and forensic experts raced to the location. They secured the crime scene and began combing through every inch, searching for evidence that could confirm Hector's story and link the suspects directly to Mario's murder. Special Agent Gil Arancha was there in person. Inside the apartment, they discovered a roll of duct tape sitting on a nightstand, a bloodstained iron rod, and unmistakable signs of violence, blood spatter, fibers, and personal items. Seeing it all firsthand was a gut-wrenching moment for the team. They had worked so hard to bring Mario home alive. To be standing now in the very place where he'd lost his life was heartbreaking. Among the evidence, they also found a roll of medical adhesive tape, hairs, and carpet fibers. Everything was collected and sent to the FBI crime lab in Washington, D.C. There, Special Agent Deadman began the meticulous work of comparing samples from 4 different scenes: the location of Mario's body, the Miami apartment where he was held, the vehicle used to transport him, and another apartment with links to the suspects. He studied carpet fibers, duct tape, even clothing threads. One key clue came from the torn edge of the duct tape found at the murder scene. Deadman matched its tear pattern to a piece of tape used to bind Mario's body, like puzzle pieces fitting together. Another breakthrough came from a strip of medical tape found on Jess Ramirez's shoe. It was an exact match to both a roll from the apartment and a piece recovered from Mario's remains. Bit by bit, the picture became clear. Jess Ramirez and Gelida Deparius were charged with kidnapping and murder. Both were sentenced to life in prison. Hector, who cooperated with the investigation, pleaded guilty to the same charges and received a 40-year sentence. But one suspect was still out there, Julio Deparius. The FBI launched a full-scale manhunt, believing he had fled to South America. Wanted posters in both English and Spanish were sent to every post office and police station in the region. Then, nearly 4 years after the abduction, in November 1988, a message came in from Costa Rica. Border agents had detained a man who matched Julio's wanted photo. When Special Agent Arancha arrived, he didn't need long to confirm it. The man looked like Julio, but it was his voice that sealed it. "I had listened to those ransom calls hundreds of times," Arancha later said. "As soon as he opened his mouth, I knew that was him. No question." Julio was extradited to the United States. Exactly 5 years to the day after Mario's kidnapping, his trial began. Julio was found guilty of kidnapping, hostage-taking, and murder. He, too, was sentenced to life in federal prison. For the investigators, especially those who had come to know the Portela family, the verdicts brought closure. They had feared justice might never be served. "This was a terrible crime," Agent Arancha said. "It would have haunted us all if it had gone unresolved. But we got them, and the family got some peace." The Portela family endured unimaginable pain, but they never gave up hope. They still honor Mario's memory and continue to follow the dream he once lived for.